Matthew, and I'm one of the careers coaches at UCFB. Thank you for joining me for session 3, which is titled Application Support. We have a number of different aims today. First of all is to explain what an application form is. We're going to discuss when and where to apply, to build your confidence with application forms by explaining what's involved, to give you hints and tips on what you should and shouldn't include in your application forms, and to give you an overview of the common mistakes that are made on application forms. And then finally, we're going to be looking at personal statements and the importance of conducting research into a company before starting your application. So what is an application form? An application form is used by companies, organizations, universities, or anywhere you're looking to apply for a particular job or scheme to check whether you're legally permitted to do the job, to provide your contact details, and to understand your work history. So to understand a bit more about you and if you're eligible to apply for whatever you're applying to do. So here's a great tip here is to keep your employment up to date on your CV. So making sure you keep a relevant track of the dates where you have been employed, and use your CV as a reference. This will make your application form far easier to fill in. A number of reasons a company would want you to complete an application form would also be to include to find out if you are right for the company. So to ensure that you have the skills, qualities, and ambitions to work at that organization. To find out if you meet key job-specific criteria, so whether you have certain skills and aspirations within the role. And to show your literacy, written, and communication skills. So if you're technically capable of doing the jobs. Applications can take quite a long time, so don't rush these applications. These are things that you want to make sure you get correct, and that also shows the employer that you're serious about taking on the job. So when should you apply? As we said in the previous slide, application forms can take a significant period of time. So make sure you have freed up some time in your diary or in your day to complete these application forms, because the last thing you want to do is to rush. So make sure you have adequate time so you can take your time to make sure you complete the application form to the best of your ability. Don't rush, and make sure the information you include in the application forms is correct. If it helps you, complete a number of drafts and pick the best draft in order to put into the application form. And if possible, make sure you send your application form off in plenty of time, because often organizations look at application forms as they come in, and you don't want to be around the time of the deadline, or definitely not after the deadline. So further details as to what's included in an application form. These are some really common things that companies, organizations, universities, or wherever you're looking to apply for something will ask you for. Personal details. This would include your name, potentially your age, address, location, and other key demographic information. They might ask your education. So education including A levels, BTECs, GCSE levels. Your employment history. So whether or not you've included information on previous jobs, part-time jobs, volunteering, etc. Activities and interests, so things that you have done aside from your academic study or aside from your schoolwork, and interests aside from those activities as well. They may also ask you to include references. These are people who you have asked to provide what's called a character reference, so a reference on the type of person that you are, or from a specific work colleague, such as a manager, who may be able to provide a reference as to the sort of colleague or employee that you have been. It may also ask you to include a personal statement. This will include information such as why you are applying to the job, what makes you suitable for the scheme or application you are making, and further information about what you can provide that organization. An application form may also include details such as competency-based questions. These can include providing real-life examples for the basis of your answers. So they might put you in a situation and talk about a situation where you have faced a challenge or a task or have worked in a specific scenario, and they will ask you how and why you came to the conclusion you made. So as stated on the slides, the candidates should explain why they made certain decisions and how they implemented these decisions and why certain outcomes took place. So they, for example, might suggest, tell me about a time when you have worked as part of a team. So then it'll be up to you to describe what was the purpose of you working as part of the team, what was the cause of the action of you working with part of a team, and what was the result of you working as part of a team. Again, the information they are trying to gather is looking at whether you are a suitable candidate for the scheme that you are applying for. So some good hints and tips here. Before you are completing your application form, make sure you research the company and job. It is really important to conduct this step. First off, it makes you clear as to whether or not this is the sort of role, organisation or scheme that is right for you. And second of all, it is good to demonstrate your knowledge of the company or organisation when you're making your application form. Make sure all of your employment dates are correct, as this really helps the organisation you're applying to check your references. Proofread thoroughly for spelling and grammar errors. If you want to run this past a parent, friend, or other individual who you trust to read through your document, this would be a good idea to do so. And a really great tip is to read your form aloud. So when you are reading aloud, it's often better than simply reading it to yourself, as this will give you an idea of how it sounds to the recruiter. Reread it to make sure that you are clear at all times and it's putting forward a persuasive argument as to why you are suitable for that opportunity, but always be truthful. It's going to be very quickly found out if you've lied on your application form, and this doesn't set the basis for good levels of employment. So common mistakes we see on application forms: poor spelling and grammar. Poor spelling and grammar are bad things on an application form or CV because it shows lack of attention to detail. So make sure you run your application forms past individuals that you trust, parents, family, guardians, someone at your school, someone you trust to read your spelling and grammar. Using the wrong company's name or wrong organization's name in the application form, it shows, again, a lack of attention to detail towards the company you're applying to. Not following the instructions on the form, so filling in certain boxes, not including information requested, not answering questions that have been put to you. These are all things you should avoid doing when completing an application form. Not tailoring the application form to fit the job that you are applying for or the scheme that you are applying for. For example, referencing things that don't matter to the organisation you're applying to. Think of great examples you can give to the company you're applying to and try to remove any examples which are not relevant to the organisation you're applying to. Leaving gaps in your employment history. So gaps will always need to be explained and they need to be understood. So make sure that you can identify any gaps in your employment history. And missing a deadline. So if you miss a deadline, it's often a red flag to an employer that you are not capable of managing your own time correctly. So do your very best to avoid any of these common mistakes. When we're looking at creating a personal statement can be quite challenging to write because you're being asked to write about yourself. But often these are a very good way of showing your skills, demonstrating your abilities, and tailoring it to the needs of the organisation you're applying to. So make sure, as with the rest of your application forms, that you take your time to write your personal statement. Remember that it has to be relevant to the skills and qualifications needed for your chosen job. Where possible and where you have access to the job specification, use the job specification as a basis for the statement, so you'll focus your application towards your chosen role. A great tip with regards to this is to use the language that the company is used in their job specification. Very typically, a job specification will list important tasks, qualities in order from most important to least important to them when making the application. So be sure to reference these key objectives, key tasks in order, if at all possible, when you're completing your personal statement. So some key things to think about and some key things to remember when making your application is that you should always evidence the impact of decisions that you've made or things that you have done through the competency-based questions. The competency-based questions, as mentioned earlier in the presentation, are there to test you and how you reacted in certain situations. So be sure to use this following method. The STAR method is what we would correctly identify as a good way of demonstrating your skills within a particular area. So STAR stands for situation. So the situation you found yourself in when undertaking this particular task, the task that you undertook in order to complete the objective, the action of yourself within the organization to complete the task, and the result of those actions. So situation, task, action, result. This is a good method to use in application forms. This is a good method to use in interviews as well. So some key questions you might be asked is, tell me about a time when you have worked with a difficult customer, or tell me about a time when you have worked as part of a team, or tell me about a time you completed an objective. So you would place yourself in that situation, what task you undertook, what action you made as a result of that task, and the result of that action. So a task for yourselves now, after this presentation, would be to come up with your own STAR-based story that you could use to evidence your impact and competency within a particular area and an application form. So thinking of the key questions I asked you on the previous slide, such as, tell me about a time when you've worked as part of a team, tell me about a time when you have achieved an objective, or tell me about a time when you worked with a difficult customer. These are quite common questions for a variety of different jobs and application forms. Use the STAR method to answer those questions to the best of your abilities. Relevance is an incredibly important part of application forms and part of personal statements. Relevance means you are tying your application form to the needs of the organization you're applying to. So to ensure your application gets a serious consideration, as mentioned previously, you should be using, where possible, the job description, job specifications as well from existing roles similar to your application and offer more than the role is asking for. So if there are multiple roles that you have seen within a particular area, using these application forms and job specifications to highlight key things within those job specifications in your application. For example, strong communication skills, leadership skills. These are all good things to demonstrate in your application form. If you use more than one advert, you might reference a skill the employer hasn't thought of and is therefore relevant and could escalate and elevate your application in the eyes of the employer. So, for example, if you're going for a customer service role and you're having to fill in an application form, you can look at a couple of job descriptions. Always use the job description which has more relevant skills, traits, and abilities. This will give you more information as to what you should be including in your application form. But bear in mind, even if you don't have work experience for a specific required skill, you can evidence this through your passions or other areas of your life. And these are called transferable skills. So skills you can transfer from other areas of your life into the world of work. So the example on the slide I'll read out to you here will say, in my spare time, I produce match reports and player analysis stats in preparation for my first analyst role. I've noticed that Coventry play mostly defence and concede an average of 3 shots per game. As a result, I would suggest that they look at players such as blank because blank. There you are demonstrating analytical skills. So this person has elected that in their spare time they produce match reports, so it shows a passion and interest in analysing the game, and they've made specific recommendations based on the knowledge that they have. So in order to make your application relevant, the correct research needs to be undertaken so you know as much about the organisation and as much about the role as you possibly can. So when you are tailoring your application, make sure you do your research on the company you're applying to. Particularly within sport, it's key to understand the ethos of the organisation, so how the club represents itself, the club's values, its motivations. These can often be found on the club's website. If you can demonstrate some of the key things that the clubs are looking for, these are great things to represent on your application forms. So the website is usually a fantastic place to find out about the organisation and the type of individual they're looking for. If you can, make reference to some key points in your application, as this will show your understanding of the needs of the business and will hopefully give you an advantage over other applicants. So again, this is using research to make your application relevant, which will elevate the status of your application above those of other candidates. Some great places to do research, as I said, are on the company website, speaking to members of the company, speaking to employees, sending an email, sending a LinkedIn message, looking on their social media and seeing the sort of messages they're portraying. All this can lead to an increased knowledge of the organisation and the better chance of your application being successful. So a final task would be to go away and look at some coaching or management jobs. So it doesn't matter right now that these jobs are out of date, but we are going to use these as a guide for the skills, traits, qualifications, and abilities that you will need. It is important at this stage to conduct an honest analysis of what skills you may be missing and how you can learn those skills between now and your next application. So this is what we call analysing a skills gap. So where is that gap in your knowledge and how can you fill that gap to make your application even stronger next time? And really key here is to look at not just one, but a number of roles, so that making sure that you are benefiting from all that information, all that knowledge, so that you can make your application as good as it can possibly be, both now and in the future. That concludes our presentation today. I look forward to speaking to you for session 4.